Our family house was nestled deep within the village, its back facing the dense thicket of trees while the front looked out over the wide, slow-moving river. The river was the lifeblood of the village. It had been for generations. It irrigated the fields, provided fish for sustenance, and served as a natural boundary between our village and the unknown. The house itself was old, built by my great-grandfather. It was a sturdy structure, made of wood and stone, with a broad veranda that wrapped around the front. I spent countless summers there as a child, running barefoot along the riverbank, feeling the cool mud between my toes, and listening to the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. But as I grew older, the house took on a different character. It was as if, with age, it had absorbed the stories and secrets of the generations that lived there. At night, when the village fell silent and the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the occasional owl, the house would creak and groan as if it were alive, shifting on its foundation. There was one thing, however, that all of us in the family spoke of in hushed tones: the lights in the river. The first time I saw the lights, I was 8 years old. It was a humid summer night, the kind where the air feels thick, and every movement seems to take more effort than usual. I was sleeping in the large room upstairs, the one that overlooked the river. My parents were in the room next door, and my younger sister, Layla, was asleep beside me. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I'm not sure what stirred me. Perhaps it was the distant sound of music, faint but distinct, like the melody of an old gramophone. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes, and looked out the window. The river was calm, reflecting the crescent moon and the stars. But then I saw them, tiny, flickering lights, like candles floating on the water. I squinted, thinking it might be fireflies, but these lights were different. They weren't darting about like insects. Instead, they moved in a slow, deliberate pattern, as if they were being carried by invisible hands. And then there was the music, growing clearer, more defined, a haunting tune, full of melancholy and something else I couldn't quite place. I nudged Layla awake, my heart pounding in my chest. She sat up groggily, but when she saw the lights, her eyes went wide. We watched in silence, too scared to speak, as the lights continued to float down the river. After what felt like an eternity, the lights faded, and the music grew distant until it disappeared entirely. The next morning, when we told our parents, they exchanged a glance. My mother, always the practical one, said it was probably just some villagers having a late-night party on the water. My father, however, looked troubled, but he said nothing. It wasn't until years later that I learned the full story. It was a cold winter evening, and we were gathered around the fireplace in the village, where old tales and rumors were shared as naturally as the air we breathed. The conversation drifted to the river and the strange things that had been seen there over the years. One of the elders, a man named Old Kofi, began to speak. His voice was low and gravelly, the kind that demanded attention. "The river has always been a place of mystery," he said, staring into the fire. "Long before our village was built, it was said to be a gateway, a crossing between our world and another." "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning forward, eager to hear more. Old Kofi looked at me, his eyes dark and serious. "There are spirits in that river, child. Spirits who were wronged, who were lost, or who simply refused to move on. And sometimes, on nights when the veil between the worlds is thin, they come out." I shivered despite the warmth of the fire. "What about the lights?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Old Kofi nodded slowly. "The lights you see are the souls of the dead, carrying on as they did in life. The music, the laughter, it's all an echo of what once was. But be warned, those who follow the lights never return the same." The years passed, and the lights became a regular occurrence. Every few months, we would hear the music, faint but unmistakable, and see the lights floating down the river. By then, I was a teenager, and my curiosity often warred with my fear. The village elders had their explanations, but I wasn't satisfied with ghost stories. One particularly warm summer night, the temptation became too much. I had just turned 16, and the desire to understand, to see for myself what was really out there, gnawed at me relentlessly. When the music started that night, louder than ever before, I decided I would follow it. Layla, now 13 and as intrigued as I was, insisted on coming along. We crept out of the house, careful not to wake our parents, and made our way down to the riverbank. The lights were there, more numerous than ever, casting an eerie glow over the water. The music was clearer too, a sad, mournful tune that seemed to draw us in. We followed the lights down the river, keeping to the shadows of the trees. The lights moved slowly, almost beckoning us to come closer. As we walked, the music grew louder, and I began to notice other sounds, soft laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the murmur of conversation, as if a grand party were taking place just out of sight. We rounded a bend in the river, and there, just ahead, was a sight that made my blood run cold. On the water, where the lights had gathered, was a boat, a grand, ornate vessel that looked like something out of a different time. The deck was filled with people, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces blurred and indistinct in the soft glow of the lights. They were dancing, laughing, and drinking, but there was something wrong about them. Their movements were too slow, too deliberate, as if they were underwater. And their eyes, oh, their eyes, were empty, hollow, as if the light had been drained from them. I wanted to turn back, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. Layla stood beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. The boat drifted closer, and one of the figures on deck, a woman in a tattered gown, turned to look directly at us. Her mouth moved as if she were speaking, but no sound came out. Suddenly, the music stopped, and the lights flickered. The woman on the boat reached out a hand, beckoning us to join them. I felt a pull, a powerful urge to step forward, to take her hand, but something in the back of my mind screamed at me to stop. With a surge of willpower, I grabbed Layla's arm and yanked her back. We turned and ran, stumbling over the roots and rocks in our path, our hearts pounding in our chests. The music started again, but this time it was distorted, twisted, as if it were coming from a broken record. We didn't stop until we reached the house. We burst through the door, gasping for breath, and collapsed on the floor. Our parents found us there, pale and trembling, unable to speak of what we had seen. The following days were a blur. I was haunted by dreams of the river, of the boat, of the people with hollow eyes. Layla was no better, she became withdrawn, refusing to talk about that night. Our parents, sensing something was wrong, tried to get us to open up, but we couldn't. We were too scared, too confused. The following days were a blur. I was haunted by dreams of the river, of the boat, of the people with hollow eyes. Layla was no better, she became withdrawn, refusing to talk about that night. Our parents, sensing something was wrong, tried to get us to open up, but we couldn't. We were too scared, too confused. Then, one night, the lights appeared again, and this time, they were right outside our house. The music was deafening, the lights blinding. We huddled together in the living room, the walls vibrating with the sound, but we couldn't escape it. It was as if the river itself had come to claim us. I don't know how long it lasted, minutes, hours, days. Time seemed to lose all meaning. When it finally stopped, we were left in silence, the house eerily still. The lights were gone, the music had ceased, and the river was calm once more. But something had changed. The air was heavier, the shadows longer. And we knew, deep down, that the river would never let us go. Years passed, and the family house by the river became more of a memory than a home. My parents eventually moved away, unable to bear the weight of the silence and the unseen presence that seemed to linger in every corner. Layla and I grew up, but we never spoke of that night, not even to each other. It was as if the river had taken a piece of us and we were too afraid to confront it. One day, I returned to the village. It was late autumn, the air crisp and the leaves a fiery red. I had been away for years, living in the city, trying to forget the past. But something had drawn me back, an inexplicable need to face the thing that had haunted me for so long. The house looked the same, though more weathered. The river was as still as I remembered, its surface reflecting the gray sky. I stood on the porch, looking out over the water, waiting for the inevitable. As night fell, the wind picked up, rustling the trees and sending chills down my spine. I could feel it coming, that familiar heaviness in the air, the distant sound of music carried on the breeze. The lights appeared just as they always had, flickering on the water, moving closer with each passing moment. I didn't run this time. I stood my ground, watching as the lights grew brighter, the music louder. And then, just as before, the boat appeared, gliding silently across the water. The same figures were there, their faces still blurred, their eyes still hollow. The woman in the tattered gown was there too, standing at the edge of the deck, her hand outstretched. She looked directly at me, and this time, I could hear her voice. "Come," she whispered, her voice soft and sad. "Join us." I felt the pull again, that same powerful urge to step forward, to take her hand. But I knew better now. I had seen what lay beyond the veil, and I knew that once you crossed it, there was no coming back. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I won't." The woman's face twisted into a mask of sorrow, and the lights around her flickered. The music warped, growing dissonant, and the boat began to drift away, the figures on deck fading into the mist. As the last of the lights disappeared, the air around me lightened, the oppressive weight lifting. The river returned to its normal, placid state, and the house, for the first time in years, felt like a home again. I left the village the next morning, never to return. The river had let me go, but the memory of that night, of the lights and the music, would stay with me forever, a reminder of the thin line between our world and the next, and the things that wait for us in the darkness.